Welcome to Skill-Based Art, a learning resource for art students and artist teachers. My name's Julian Bruere. I'm a watercolour painter and marine watercolour painter. I define the two as different. I think marine art is a genre all of its own that needs its own special space, and today I'd like to be doing a romantic watercolour demonstration of a scene with a boat struggling. It's inspired by an original little sketch that was done in a class demonstration demonstrating black and white. It came from working with grey neutral tint in a very spontaneous manner, and then it found its way, had a boat into it. So it was a kind of a sketch lead up into something. With that, I saw it and enjoyed it enough that I actually wanted to produce it in the sketchbook, and here I've just explored the scene a little bit further. And I've kind of looking at this as a colour study with a boat involved. My work tends to be longer term sort of a project. I'll tend to spend 20 or 30 hours painting. In these ones you get a lovely fresh spontaneity within about half an hour as you're painting, but there's no real detail. But I would like to take the flavour of those two earlier parts and impart that onto a half sheet watercolour and keep it as a study for a major piece later on. We'll be working in watercolour. I'll start off with some brushes. When I first set up, I like to use some larger brushes to get some flow and coverage going very quickly. So that's a hake, which may be too large for the half sheet, but these smaller ones and this lovely round scrubby brush will be an excellent beginning piece. I'll use an array of rounds going from large mediums down to some of the smalls for some of the detail of rigging and the like. I have a few speciality brushes that I particularly like to work with. This is both Neef comb brushes. That means they've got that little bit of tooth in to them. They're quite beautiful. They're flats. They impart an interesting brush mark all of their own, particularly like those in skies as well as in the sea. And this one is a bright stiff synthetic. I've sawed this one down, chopped the end off. This is its longer one. Either's fine, but it's really got a lovely stiff bristle which is quite beautiful for scrubbing back and rubbing into the painting as we go along to get some soft misting sort of effects of the bow wash or something. They're a really valuable brush to me. When I draw, I do like to work with a sharp pencil, so I tend to have a number of those set up, and that gets a cleaner defined line into the painting. You'll see when I'm working how I play with that one in the drawing side of it. I have a ruler here, and it's a 15-inch one where I can get them. Quite beautiful for brush ruling, a technique I'd like to demonstrate for the rigging. The palette I'm working with is a larger palette, so it's got a good mixing area for building in the broad washes, and there's a warm, a blue and a grunge section to it as I line it out, and there's an inner and outer circle. On the inner circle there's a white gouache which I actually feed into my colours a little bit from time to time. It's a interesting proposition. We'll talk about that when we're painting. Some people don't like gouache. It actually produces colours that you don't get otherwise. Raw sienna, burnt sienna, French ultramarine, cobalt blue, cobalt turquoise, Windsor violet, and down in here we have raw umber, a shadow violet and a red violet of sorts. They're in the same well. They mix up as a nice sort of a grunge mix. An area I go to a lot, another area I go to a lot, and the blues become lovely supplementals to it. On the outside we have an array of greens that I don't particularly like using, but I like to have them in the palette. Some other blues, cerulean blue, which is actually starting to find its way into my palette more and more. It should be invited into the inner circle if there was room. Alizarin crimson, cad red, pyrrole orange, a Hansa yellow and a lemon yellow at the top left there. I keep my yellows up high because that helps to keep them cleaner if you need to have that clean sort of splash of yellow. If it were inverted, crossover of paint would likely to stain them a fair amount. My interest in maritime painting probably evolved more from my dad read me Treasure Island, and this is a lovely old 1930s edition with some beautiful illustrations by Munro S. Orr. That has been a huge influence in my life since about the age of 7, 10. But then I actually matured a little bit and started to buy a number of maritime books. And so this one is just a classic little French collection of prints, which has all sorts of enigmatic interest about some of the ship's shapes and the riggings in them as they go. And I have in another room a library of about 50 or 60 books, all exploring different aspects of marine architecture and marine history, because they become my real favourite sort of interest. So you can see that my interest in marine painting stems from reading and leads into my painting, and my more general landscape painting probably comes the other way, where I don't need to do any research. That's more about exploring the mediums and the techniques of watercolour. They combine quite nicely on the page, so you'll probably see those two sides of it appearing as we paint. I think without further ado, we'll just move in and start doing the painting. Okay, here we are back again with our drawing board, and our reference is more in mind than it is in actual existence. I do have the sketch, as you can see, top left hand corner. That will be what I'll keep referring back to, but not to absolutely adhere to it if I need to, because spontaneity on the page is important. You'll notice in my left hand I have 4 very sharp pencils. I will use them quite lightly, and the first little bit of drawing, I tend to like to just be very, very slow and suggestive of it. And you almost think about Michelangelo and that bit of marble. You're trying to just feel and see what the final form of this boat is going to be, rather than be too determined that it's going to have a gunwale here or a stern there, and just position it in. So you can see I'm just stroking the pencil quietly. You won't even necessarily see it on camera, but it is starting to communicate almost by me just seeing the marks and making the marks, almost like a muscle memory. And I've positioned it on the page quite deliberately. There is my centre. I've made a little reference mark to it. It doesn't have to be more than a smidge. I just need to know it's there. And along the sides here I have my thirds, and along the tops I have my quarters. That may or may not be relevant. It's always good, I think, as a painter, if you're thinking compositionally, to design where you reckon you're heading with your painting. There is some wave activity, and I do have a plan. Always good to plan what you're trying to do. But there are some sweeping waves coming across. And here again, the drawing is practically invisible to you, I suspect, but I'm actually understanding exactly where things are, and I'm starting to see the spaces and the shapes evolving. I'm not going to overly draw on this one. As I said, I'm looking for it to be a kind of an impressionistic sketch of the maritime battle. Maritime scene, sorry. I do a lot of sea battles. Ship is hauling its way through one large wave, which will become part of the drama of the scene. I love having a quiet narrative in my own head. If I'm painting on my own music, I'll play mariner type music just to put myself in the mood. The room is reasonably cool, and I like that mainly because that slows down the drying process of the paint a little, but also it starts to give you a sense of the emotions that you're thinking starting to form up. So when drawing boats or ships, foreknowledge is very good. So I look at a lot of reference. I look at other painters and how they've painted their boats, and I'm looking at plans of ships and drafts of ships. But I'm an armchair sailor, meaning I've never really been to sea, and that may alarm a real maritime enthusiast, but it doesn't mean I haven't spent a lot of hours understanding the architecture of the boat as it builds into it. Our wind is coming from the right, and our light is coming from the right as well on this occasion. So that is important to kind of remember. Sometimes I'll even just give myself suggestive arrows in the marking up, just so I keep reminding myself in there. I do paint outdoors, not these sort of scenes obviously, but it is important to recognise what the weather conditions are and where the light is happening in your painting. Okay, the sweep of the gaff up here. I have a ruler. I could rule the lines, but I'm not really interested in getting too exact at this stage. When I do the brush ruling later, that will come into play. And now I'm just looking and feeling for the ratio of what is happening, the size of the sail, the cut of their jib if you'd like, to the actual hull. Because I don't want the sail to look pathetically small, but nor do I want it to dominate. Coming up in here, there's a bit of a step in the mast. Where I know there's going to be dark information, like here is a dark boom or gaff that's coming out, I can dig the pencil in a touch more. Here there is a step in the mast from the main mast to the upper mast. Here there's another step. I can actually afford to be a little bit stronger with my pencil, so I can start to see it as the painting goes on. I have a thought here. In my original reference, you'll notice there's a square rig beam across or spar across, and I'm not sure I need it. And looking at some reference earlier, I don't know that it's going to be necessary in the painting, so that's an optional extra if I need to. It's a darker element, so it's not hard to put in if I need to. You may recognise that as I've drawn, I've actually repeated myself a number of times with my pencil, restatement if you'd like. That's another element I think is important, is to keep rehearsing almost what you're looking at and doing. This is a yawl, which means it's got a little steering sail at the back. I like them because they are strange, they look odd. And they create that nice little annoying element into the sort of shape of it, but hopefully it's an annoyance that is interesting to look at as the painting goes on. Getting a bit of light and shade onto that side here. I'm often asked, can you overdo the pencil? And my stock answer is no. You could render as long as you wanted to, and you could do that very, very fine rendering. Heavenly rain is what I like to call it, where it's all coming at about a 45-degree angle and building up. But in this context, because I'm thinking sketch-like, I don't want to overdo it. There are parts in this painting that I'm not sure I can see as the drawing yet, in which case I may just wait and see what the paint does, and that might be where I define some of these edges. Very easy to get the boat feeling like it's a bit crank. Change of pencil, hence why you have a number of them. There's a quarter deck, there's a mid deck, and there's a fore deck. And in a three-masted ship, there's a mizzen mast, a main mast, and a foremast. And in a brig, it's the main, also yawl, it's the main mast and the mizzen mast. Got a bowsprit coming out. That's likely to have a jib of some sort. So here we have a little bit of a nice enigma, in that we've got our ship leaning into the wind with the sails blowing, but its part is that ships roll around a lot, so it is a nice thing to sometimes counter the wind with a push of the boat into it as it's rolling around on the painting. In here is very, very unimportant in terms it's a dark, so I don't have to really find the detail in there at the moment. Along this whole side of the ship, I want to get a bit of a light going from a light through into a dark, is the plan, and I'm going to have a little bit of a dark across the stern of the boat, so there'll be some light and attention on in there as well. Things like the shrouds will go from around about here. I'll put in a bit of a reference for the cross tree, or cross trees. Crow's nest in the old language, perhaps, you'll understand. Build it up and around. So there will be ropes that go from that point down to the side of the ship here to a thing called a channel. And the channel is just a a leverage point for those ropes to go through, and it has to be on the other side of the sail because it flaps around. All the things that you can do that are erroneous with boats is you can have rigging where it can't possibly exist, like backstays with a gaff sailed. It tends to look a bit awkward because the sail can't possibly move from one side to the other. So the engineering of the boat is important to understand and know for that reason, and that's the sort of thing you often find when you're looking at a painting, is if the artist actually knows their boat architecture. In composition, I actually really enjoy knowing where my centre is, and I'm actually happy for this boat to feel like it's approaching into the middle of the painting. It's probably just a little bit short of it, but if an element actually found its way onto that centre, I would be delighted. It won't on this occasion, it's just that little bit too far away. But we often, as painters, have a mixed idea of whether we should have a centre or not have a centre. And I've got a friend, Walter Magilton, who some may know, and I've talked to him about composition and said, what do you do with your centres? And his answer is, avoid them like the plague. I'm thinking, well, that's a thought, and I kind of like it as a response, and I think every artist will make their own individual decisions about that. But historically, I think if you start looking closely at the composition of paintings, centres aren't something to actually be very afraid of or worried. Got some light coming in here. In articles that I've written I talk a bit about having the boat or the ship married to the sea, and you almost have to feel that they belong. It actually is a deeper hole, so it's going down in here somewhere, and all this water is moving around into it. That's important to recognise and feel as much as know. Just changing that. So at some point here, I've actually started to enjoy my drawing, and I'm not sure when it was. There was initially setting it up, and I love those earlier drawing marks, and as I'm pushing the pencil around and building up the values and the tones into it, starting to quietly like it. Because it's sort of feeling like a stocky, hardy little yawl battling in here with some elements. Wave, not overly worried, that's why I've done the sketch study. I know I want to have a dark forewater or foreground, if you'd like. I want that to be dark. I'm creating a lighting that may work for us, and not always confident it will work, because it's a subtlety that may impart or it may sort of disappear in the process. But I want to feel like this boat is sailing from the dark into the light, and that is to promote the thought that it's sailing into safety. So I'm happy for it to be threatened by being a wind-driven boat. It's likely to be on a rocky lee shore, as I used to say, but I don't want it to be feeling like all is lost. So the light and dark is a little bit of the narrative, if you like, that's going on in the painting, or the drawing at this point. Restate sort of things in here. That whole thing about, can you draw too much? Yep, you can, perhaps. I think I'm contradicting myself. Not that the lead pencil is the problem, it's just that you can just overdo it and not need to be doing what I'm doing now. I feel I got that behaving quietly how I want it to do. So the pencils go away. In my classes, I'm always at pains to let people know that because you're finished with your drawing of the pencil doesn't mean you're not allowed to pick it up again later on. You can pick it up at any time you need. So here is a point in the reference. So I'm going to be painting the sky. I'm going to go right through the boat. I'm not going to make it sacrosanct or hold lights into it, but I am going to hold some light in the sea down in here. It may be close to the white of the page. I think it's probably not going to be. I think it's going to have a little bit of a value into it. And camera-wise, we may be able to see that or not see it. I'm just flooding in with some water now. Part of the marriage of it. And there's going to be some darks in my boat. And there's going to be some lights up into it as well. Perhaps a warmer light, so I'm going into raw siennas and stuff like that. purpose of that is nothing to show in the painting. It's just almost reminding myself of what's going to be coming in there. It's going to get washed out in a few minutes and stuff like that as it goes along in the painting, but it starts to liquefy the page as it's coming up. Best way of liquefying, so this is a spray bottle, Taboo perfume. Mary, my partner, gets gifts of Taboo perfume from me quite regularly because I really think it provides a lovely spray and a mist into it. And you can get them by lifting the little joining in here. They don't unscrew, they do it cunningly so you can't refill it up with a fake perfume. But you can lift that off, so that always just stays there. You fill it up with water, but it's one of the best misters that you can have. That's sort of making the page wet without being absolutely soaked. You may get a little bit of a rippling develop, but not a huge amount as it goes in there. Still with that brush, could easily come up into here. Happy for that to just drift along as it builds into it. So now it's going to become quite a wet in wet painting, and I want to feel like all the elements are connecting in. You'll notice I haven't drawn the headland in, and I think I just want to find it and let it happen as a natural wet into wet to give it a recession and a depth into it. And this one won't have a specific horizon. I'm not going to do a hard-edged horizon. I want it to just be a gentle drift. So there's almost like these atmospherics and mists adds to the atmosphere of it, but it means you don't have to worry about a straight line going across either. Down in here is going to be a volume. Colour, I've got a little bit of a lemon yellow. Throw that up in there. So my sky is green. How could I do that? But it's going to be a plaid green. I can add a touch of alizarin into it to warm it up an amount. And what this is really doing is making this all very wet. So that has a lot of water and paint into it. It's what I call a drinkable wash. Don't drink it, but if you look at it, it's almost like a tea wash, or very, very thin. But it's just dampening the page down again and starting to impart an element of colour. Watercolour dries very, very lighter than, it dries a lot lighter than it goes down. Just run it down into there. So that's created a whole area of the painting that is quite damp and wet and doing some things. Put it aside for the moment. And that would dry back to the light of the page, and it probably won't really show. So I'm just going to strengthen it up a fraction. Going in with a bit of a green. And the green itself is too much, so if I go up into these areas of the palette and just kick it back with a bit of alizarin, and then just search for the colour until it feels like it comes together. A little bit of Windsor Violet might come into it. You can even try to touch a cerulean into it as well. So as much as I'm mixing out here on the palette, I'm also mixing up here on the page and just searching for that. It doesn't have to be absolutely flat. Just keep working through and see it till it starts to behave, right through the boat, up into the top corner. Got some light over here, load back in. So an experienced painter, and I'd like to hope I'm one, knows almost what's going to happen instinctively rather than calculated when they start putting their paints here. And when they're selecting through, you're almost doing it by memory or instinct rather than actually saying, I need to go and get a bit of that and a bit of that. Ironically, when you're sort of in any sort of a class, the first thing you're being asked is, what colour is that? And that'll fox some painters a little bit, because they'll be thinking, I don't know, what did I put in there? It can be a bit of a mystery at times. But such is the fun of the medium, that I can sort of explore and play with those ones. And again, like the pencil drawing, I'm waiting for it to emerge ever so slightly. That is going to be quite light, which possibly is better than the sketch. I'll come back in with some work in a moment. There's a nice little light patch appearing in here. Not a bad place for it either, because it's right in connected with the boat, and it can drift through into these areas as it's going along. Got the headland to come in soon. You may not see it, but on this page there is a fraction of a line here, and it's either something that has been looked at or drawn in. It could be a machine influence, I don't know. There's something happened in there, and it's probably telling me to do something on that line for the headland. So I might change the amount of headland I've had and come in back onto the third rather than all the way through, but go up a little bit higher onto it. So this is where you depart from the sketch, but it is where it's kind of good to know where your quarters and thirds are, so you can actually play with that as a compositional thing or an element. You'll notice how all that's wet, and I've been happy to just let that drift down. I have a tissue. If I soak it down, if I need to dry the page any, I can just dab around on that one. It's gone into the Windsor Violet. That's one of those corruptive colours that finds its way into your painting whenever you're not watching. Whenever those sort of things happen, try not to sweat about it. There'll be something you can do with it. Let me put that there for the moment. So I'm moving to a filbert comb. It's a one with a little bit of a tooth, and it's a flat edge. It's quite a beautiful brush to work with. I think if you can see the palette there, that is fresh paint, and often that whole instinctive thing comes into play where you're not aware that you've put fresh paint down. You're used to it being that little bit harder, and so you can sometimes go a little bit over heavy with it. That's a dark value, and I'm putting a bit of gouache into it, white gouache Boo Hiss, and you can notice how that changes the colour. It may look like something there, and it will possibly behave quite differently when it hits the page. Burnt sienna, raw sienna, anything just to darken it down a bit. You can see the beautiful wet in wet sort of coming in here. It's little scudding clouds. Can I do something here with it? I can perhaps put one down in here. And its job is just to blend in there. That sail is getting some light. It's going to have a dirty light, but that might help us just to kick it out a fraction. It's splitting a little bit. That means the colour as it's drying is splitting from the blue into the mauve, because it's probably mixed up with a couple of those ones. And you can fight it or not. I won't fight it on this occasion. I'll let it be. Come back up into this part of the painting. Perhaps warm it a fraction. I have a grandson, Max. He'll be glad to be mentioned. He taught me how to use my brushes properly, and that is push them around and scrub into them a bit if you need to. Don't be too precious with them unless you've gotten a Skoda and spent money on them. Maybe not do it like that. I tend to not worry about expensive brushes. I prefer to just have kind of cheaper throwaway brushes. To my right is a box of them. Got a lot. Come down. That's just visiting the halfway mark. See that centre? I'm just going to put that into play and annoy you. And we can see how that behaves in a painting. Whenever I'm doing demos, I like to feel that I'm trying things for you, and you can decide whether it works or not and whether you want it in your own painting. Bridging that around. So while I've been working in all of this area, I've been allowing some sections just to settle down. They're not dry, but they're just settling into the page a fraction, and I can work with them and build them up into it. So in here, that big cloud up there, in my reference up on here, you'll see that top left had a lovely clear space. I think I probably preferred that clear space, but I'm liking this section a little bit more. So this is where the trade-off comes when you're working a little bit more spontaneous. You may find that you get something in a sketch that is great and you wished you'd remembered it, and other times it doesn't matter. You'll get something else somewhere. Paintings have their own personalities at times. Watercolour definitely has its own personality. So I'll give you a rest from my voice every now and then, and that's usually an indication that actually I'm enjoying my painting and going into it a little bit, or searching for something. I always feel that it's a medium which invites that idea of investigation and trying things. You may notice how my brush has been flicking around all over it. I'm sitting here and I'm watching the entire scene dry as it comes out. So you see this little split that's happened up in here. Perhaps it shows blue, pink. Nice, but looks a little bit fake. So I'll just brush it, being a nice thin comb. And that's what I call, the brush is just kissing the page. It's not really working too hard on it at this point. It's just getting in there and lifting that out. There's some life in those colours. This is why it's really nice to use mixed colours from your palette rather than go and get a grey or neutral tint. Greys tend to be a very dead colour. These you can possibly see are opening up and getting some nice variations into it. Okay, so that now looks like it's darker than that area, so I want to get some depth coming in here. So I'll move over here, Tassie Blue, and anything that just makes it that little bit dirty is going to be good for me. Bit of violet. Touch of the gouache even again. Whatever that colour is, you'd think a painter would know exactly what's in their palette all the time. Now and then you just put stuff in there and you remember the paint, you don't necessarily remember the name. And I'll just test it as a bit of a value. So it can't afford to go too blue. The colourings I'm setting are a lot more green, sandy sort of a value. A blue is just going to stand out a little bit too much. It does in the original sketch. So I will just move it off a little bit. And what I'm searching for is that edge that's appearing. So that's a nice little flash of light into it. Drop that down. There's the headland. Brushes are very thirsty as it's going into this wet area. It's grabbing all the water in there and soaking up. So I'm drying it here, or I can just tap it on the page a little bit to try and maintain that area. That line that I thought I saw has disappeared. Happy with that. We've got atmospherics happening in here, so perhaps in here you can see that I've got a bit of an edge or a line. I may get away with not having that. It may feel like there's a lot more storm happening. Maybe this was a little bit later as it drifts through. So I'm feeding that down. In a watercolour, you'll never go wrong with working from the top to the bottom and from your light to your dark. And you don't have to always adhere to that, but that is a very safe way of working your painting. And if you change from that direction, which is more than okay, you just do it with a thought as to why you're doing that, rather than, you know, just to change for the sake of it. So I'm happy to have been in the sky and feel like it's resolved. I'm still watching it dry out, see if there's anything strange. There's some hairs over in here from somewhere, probably not mine. I'll leave them sit. If I try to flick them off or dry them out, or they'll actually make more evidence. And if they become a part of the painting, I would wear that in a sketch. Getting a little bit of sense that maybe there's some folds in the mountain or the headland. I don't want it to become a very strong sunlit sort of a scene, so I'm just a bit careful of how strong I make that, and also, as I said before, how blue, so I'll just brown that off or mauve that off. You'll notice as I'm going, I'm sort of grabbing paint, going into that mix, and then revisiting back into the scene here. And I'm aware of the edge. So being the colder studio at the moment, this is just drying and settling into the page quite beautifully. It's allowing me to almost airbrush these in, and they're drifting away with some of the moisture, but they're not losing their distinction at this point. Shape-wise, you won't go wrong with a formula of one large, one medium, one or two smalls. And that can often be how to not have it feel like it's absolutely robotic or level. So that's you know, 1, 2, and a couple of small additions into it. And really, your light is actually what really is your audience really enjoying more than anything. It's an irony, isn't it? You're painting darks and people are looking at what you're not painting. Building in there. Okay. Let's take some of that sting out of that part of the palette. Going into some siennas, hint of cobalt turquoise, just to get a bit of a green going into it. I'll make a bit of an introduction to what I'm planning. Working in the base here. There's a lovely little brush mark there. I often talk about don't fall in love with your painting too early, because you may have to change it. Settling in some of those moments. So you can enjoy them while they're there and then go, yeah, but I've got a plan that's not really part of the plan to have that in there. Drifting a little bit in here. On this occasion, that one might actually stay and last. Later on I'll talk somewhere about the wave shapes. So I don't have a wave reference. In my head I'm thinking waves or feeling waves, and I find there's a painter, Chris Major, who you won't know anything about, and he did book covers for the Belifo series, and in it he would sort of work with gouaches and just push them around quite randomly until something sea-like had developed, and he felt like, yep, that's the ocean happening in there, and then he'd sort of exploit and just develop it up. And I think that's how I like to think of my painting as well, that rather than getting locked in and thinking, okay, that wave must fold into that one and that one, I'd rather they just quietly emerge more instinctively or sort of biomorphically than anything. And then I think they look a little bit more natural and unfussed. The same would be said for, say, in a landscape doing the foliage of a tree. You'll find that it actually behaves a little bit better if you don't think of them too much as leaves, but just find these nice intuitive shapes. Save some of that light in there. I want a lot of light on this side here because I've got this ship rolling and I've got some light to contend with. Going into the cerulean. So I'm putting a little bit of a blue in here that I didn't have in the first sketch. And we'll see if I can make that work. Just pulling that back a little bit as we go into it. Round into that side of it. I'm looking for my mirror, so I think I can reach out. I'll be back later. So that's a mirror, and it's just a plastic one. And when you're starting to work into some of these forms and you're trying to feel whether they're behaving or not, reflection in a mirror would be a really nice thing. It gives you a whole new, fresh sense of it. And I'm feeling I can see that boat is starting to haul its way out of the water. It's almost like the sea is clinging and trying to drag it under, which is a nice sort of emotion or feel I wouldn't mind having into it. And I'm looking at levels here to see whether they can behave okay. And I think I can probably afford to go back up into that headland a fraction more up in here. So I'm going to make the paint that little bit stronger. That's a nice little glob of paint in there. It'd be just beautiful to not waste it, so I'm going to just chuck it down in there and make it come into play later on. Because I know I've got some rocks and things like that happening here, I don't mind it. So you can sort of see that's a big smear of paint in the painting to be addressed and sorted out in time. Went just a little bit umbery. And now I think I like something that's happening. So this is again the spontaneity of the medium. It just suggested something there of going just a little bit darker as it heads up into that depth for the background. I'm going to lose it right there. Regain it back in here. And I'm thinking again, bigger shape, couple of smaller ones. Maybe that's a little bit large for that one. We'll see. push the brush around with that. Whoa. So that's an error, but I don't think it'll be a fatal one, because you just work with it. And what it's saying to me now is it's a moment that might be nice to enjoy, ironically, because it's done something a bit unexpected. It may actually impart a little bit of life into the painting you weren't expected to get. So I'm just loading the paint up in here. It's very moist, not too pure, allows me to dig in there. I went away, it was a nice edge, and came back to it, and suddenly it's starting to flare a little bit. Don't mind that, that's alright. Build it up into there a little bit. Again, I'm going back to my mirror. Before I finish up with that headland, I've got to check that it's going to behave or work, and I'm not sure it's doing exactly what I want. I think I need another one in there to make it behave properly. So I think I might just come back in now before it's too late and grab another one. Again, wasn't in the original plan, but it's getting suggested to me now. You can see how that changes when I add the gouache into it. Back into the violet, a bit too purpley, get a bit of green, get a bit of grunge in there, contested in the rock there. So it's still wet, it's giving me a nice little edge, and I think I can just drag that down. And what it is, that dark there was too strong for that one, I felt, so now it's starting to help me to be in there, and it's just become another headland closer by, and it too might have some folds into it. So ultramarine, burnt sienna, grunge, ultramarine again, burnt sienna, perhaps a bit of shadow violet into it. See how that behaves into it. So that's now going to become a little bit more of a nearer rock surface. I'm checking out which nails I haven't bitten lately, just to introduce a little bit of bite into the headland. That's happy to have that as drift. These are just little marks that I can make with my nail in there. If I like them, I leave them. If I don't, I'll just tap over them. But they become some sort of a life and annoyance. And again, what it's trying to do is say that's all one plane separate away from the last one. And it would be nice if that works. A painter, you're a faker as well. So often in a demonstration particularly, you are convincing your audience and yourself that it's working. Doesn't necessarily mean it is, but it's easier to work with the positive and say things are working, and very often they start to unfold and do work out a bit better. So getting that dark in there. That was a clumsy way to clean my brush. Perhaps a towel might have been a better one, but it's a darker value. Won't matter. Oh, good. Nice little green-blue colour. Got a bit more cerulean and violet in here. That might look like a mishmash, because it is, but I think it might work for me, because it's going into some of the colours that I want to have. So in the reference you might just see that sense that the rocks are joining the waves, and like the boat needs to feel like it joins in, this does too. There's a couple of little flashes of light in here with the paint. It's quite dry in this part, that's totally dry, a little bit moist. Run it up close to my boat. Down it comes. And in a very primitive way you can sort of see how we've got a dark and a flash of light, and there's some darks on here. So we're sort of getting a sense of staging, if you'd like, into it. A little bit of relief in there which may or may not, I don't know, not sure I'm happy with it totally. While it's moist I might just sort of kill it off a fraction. Leave that one, lose that one. Being wet in wet, when I put in some stronger lines later on, they might actually work quite nicely. Again, that whole bluff thing about feeling confident even if you're not. Back into here. Often when I'm painting in these sort of moments, you can feel like your paint is a bit strong, and then ironically it just isn't. When you finish up the painting, you feel like you could have gone stronger every time as you build in some darks. Big sweep of water in here, going into all my colours. I want it to be sea-like, but I don't want ultramarines. Happy with mauves. And what I'm painting here isn't the dark parts of the water, this is the light part of the water. So I'm looking at the edge, just working where to put my brush. It's not flat, it's got a nice gentle angle sweeping in. Here is the pressure of wind and atmosphere forcing our boat in there. So rather than have an angle coming down, I'd rather it came through out of this side here. Even if, let's see how far we can keep raising it. So it's getting up close to my third mark again, and that's close to where the horizon is. I'm thinking why this is still a little bit moist. I'm going to try and quickly get a horizon in there. So I've flipped to the smaller version of this brush. I'll just pick the colour I've got, and you'll see I've put a ruler on here. So rather than put tape down or a ruled line, like a mole stick, I'll just run that through. I'll run it out of the boat. I can sort it out later. Going across a few of the undulations of the page, work it in there. You can see how it's still a little bit moist, and immediately it's revealed what we've done over here a little bit. It's actually given us a little bit of a shape and a form coming into it. Because it stops at the boat, I don't want it to feel like it's a magic thing. I'm going to give it a hint over here in the headland. And again, I could feel like it's a little dark perhaps, but I'll live with it for the moment. Just that edge. It's just introducing some annoyance in there. So they've splattered up into my sky, don't mind that doing it. They've splattered in here and they've given a little bit of cauliflower bloom, if you'd like, into it, and we can say we love them and leave them, or you can just sort of come back and just play with them a touch, perhaps get a bit of a darker value in there if I need to. Don't lose them all. Some of them, because they happen naturally, they're going to be behaving all right. Run that back and again across. Move it up as it goes out to the side. Maybe there's some other sails out there that are struggling with the wind and the weather as well. Find a third. Now they may or may not work and survive. I'll go confidently that they're going to be brilliant. Searching for another brush, but not that one. Where do I park them all? Try that one. It always seems as a painter that you've got a brush for every moment. Didn't want that one. Happy with that one. There's a lot out there today. There you go. Take it out with my fingers. Come back in here again with that one. I've got some dark on the boat to put in here soon. I'll just let that settle just a fraction more. I think why that is starting to settle and dry, I'll put a half value in there. So this will actually be the light of the deck, raw sienna. probably just want to push it more into a warmer colour away from the green so it doesn't get confused with the sea. Drift it in there. So if we think of this object as having a back, which is the stern, a side, which is the hull, and a top, which is the deck, and I'm thinking of 1, 2, 3, and I'm thinking very much almost back to the primitive form of what a cube would do, and I want to have that sort of behaviour in play in the painting. Down in here, it's still that little bit moist, which is nice, but it's holding its edge fractionally. And this is where that original drawing comes into play again. I'm sort of trying to remember where it is if I can't see it. Drift that moisture around. Cut it in. And this being a wet in wet means I can sort of play with the colouring a little bit, get some grunge into it. Got a hole coming in here, or a stern. There was a nice little shape I had that I've lost. So that's where this stiff synthetic is. I might just cut that back in there for the moment. So what I'm doing is I'm wetting the brush, wetting the page, and then just drying back into it. So it's dry, dab it on the towel, lift out that little bit of light, and I've just checked in there underneath the hull or the stern a little bit. And it's a bit clumsy in parts, but I can always refine that a little bit more. You can see that just lifting into that one, I can soften edges whenever I need to. Watercolour's given this idea that you can't do anything with it once it's on the page. Quite a non-truth. You can do a lot with it while it's still wet. Moisture is one of your best friends into it. It means it runs away a little bit more than you expect at times, but it means that you can still work it through. So you can feel perhaps the deck, side, stern. I'll just add a little bit more dark into that section. When I paint, I paint little dobs in there and let them become approximates, paint in the centre and then push it out to something and see how it behaves. So if I come back in on that, what I cleaned out before, I can check it in. It's such a dark, I can come back and visit that. Its job is really just to establish those little 3 values that are going on in there. I might even use it to tease in a little bit at the lower part of the sail as well as it comes around. Unresolved, but it's starting to give me some tonal values into it. So it's all very wet and gloomy, which implies rain. I don't think I'll last with all of that, but it gives me a chance to let that settle and dry. I've done a little bit of an underpaint there. I can do some more in there. Probably it'll be the detailing of it will come into play soon. Just run that one off in there. This is like I was saying earlier with the drawing, what you think you're drawn may look perfect, but if you have a little bit of a get out of jail card, you'll find as you throw your tones in, it actually imparts a whole sort of a shaping that you might really be able to work with. And if you've got a very fixed line, you've got absolutely nowhere to go but to fill to the line. By being a bit broader and sketchier with it, you kind of get a little bit more of a opportunity to kind of bounce it around and let it sort of develop and build. So as I was painting all that, I think I was in my own little head there, and so sometimes sentences I'm saying may make sense, and if they don't, understand that as well. Okay, up over the top in here. Let me see where I've parked it. I've put some breadcrumbs out. So these are breadcrumbs. These ones I think are cornflakes ones. It doesn't matter. I'll throw a little bit of mist in there just to soften that up a touch. I'm just going to throw a few in there. Not many, just a few. And what they're doing is they're like a salt. They might just create a little bit of churn or movement or imperfection in the sea, but they're kind of a nice little device for making texture for some rocks or something like that if you need to. Let's go with the shaping of this one as we're coming through. May as well be up into that spot where I didn't want it to be, and you can just crop down. Here is my quarter. I think I'll just keep it in the quarter for this stage. I'd like to have a good amount of space in there. And what I'm really looking at is the top of this rock rather than the base at this stage. So I'm looking at the shape as it forms along. And builds in. And it's got a soft wet edge. It's got a nice little colour in here. So we've got a little bit of a yellowy brown, a greeny tone and a mauve tone. So there's a transition of interest in there. The big question is, what do you do with the breadcrumbs? And the truth is, I just let them dry, and they will dry benignly in the painting. And later on, I've got a barbecue cleaning brush or a Brillo pad, whatever you need. We'll just take it off quite happily. So again, put in a dark. This is to create form rather than light and shade. Being an overcast day, there's not a lot of that to worry about. There may be moments in here that you're quite enjoying, and I'm painting through your bit of the painting, I know. But what I'm trying to do is feel like we've got the sea waves breaking in here. So I'm giving them some edge and splash, if you'd like. And just drown it out a little bit. Push it through, lighten through into it as well. So this rock here is a nice little foil. Its purpose is really just to be as a lead to the boat, but it's also giving us a dark look we can enjoy and match with it, so that they kind of have a bit of a conversation to go together. They're separated, but being a darker value is important to it because it helps to kind of get some context, and its introduction has probably started to create a sense of light, which previously was a bit dark. You remember when that went in and how dark it was, and now it's forced back a bit as we're going. So we're getting a nice stepped atmospheric sort of recession going into it. Let's see where we can go in with the sea now. Mixing in quite a good dark. There's a cobalt turquoise in there, ultramarine to kick it back, bit of burnt sienna to make it not too lollied. And let's have a bit of where we're going to run these waves. So this is like a rehearsal. Don't mind some coming up in here because I've got a plan. So that dark creates a light, and then that light reads as foam. And again, you said that confidently. Lay at the base here. Keep thinking of what the shapes are. Even though I'm painting fluidly and spontaneously, I'm still thinking all the time as to, is that a shape I can live with? And it might be that little mark in there behaves. Perhaps you need to get something else. Builds into it. And it can work or not work depending on how you view it. If it doesn't work, there are ways of undoing it. So painting the sea, again, I once gave a class and I explained that painting the sea, you almost had to make the sound effects. You almost had to believe you're at sea and feel the brush movements and the strokes rather than try and be too calculated with it as you might in a more architectural sort of a form where you're trying to put a roof and a wall and stuff. This is an organic moment, so you're looking to create these nice sort of responses to it. So that's a nice little area. And then that leads into that area. So now we've got this sort of almost John Sell Cotman sort of layering of different values in this dark that looks quite nice. And then that creates a little bit of a dark here, and that suddenly gets forced into light. That's the beauty of watercolour. It just emerges. The darks, as you add them, create lights even in dark areas. And it may be that is almost going to be enough into the painting. Not the painting entirely, but in that sort of part of the water. So that's a damp tissue that I've wet, and I'm going to just push up into my waves a little bit, or into my rock a bit. Looks like it's coming down in that case. So the breadcrumbs were put in earlier, and I'm just going to search for my pocket knife. Swiss Army knife. And I can do it with my nail, but equally I can sort of work in with the blade. And those are, you know, they're just demonstration as to what you can do. See how it's, with the breadcrumbs it's softened it up, but I'll just move those around a bit, just soften them a touch, because I think I don't want to have any sort of screaming lights in here, but I wouldn't mind just a little bit of relief into it. Tap, 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 tap. So the breadcrumbs and the knife scoring and the volume of it are creating just about all the texture I really need into it. So that's my finger gone into some tone. There's no reason why that is one of your best brushes. Raw umber can look a bit suspicious, I know. Yes, I know I can do it with a brush as well, and there's plenty of good reasons why I should, but I think it's just something every now and then you're painting, just try things that you weren't expecting to try out into it. Cleaning my finger, exactly as I would. So all of that's given me just a little bit of an opportunity to play with in here, and we can just see whether that's starting to dry a little bit. So this is what I'd like to think is the painting is always being able to be worked in an area. Throw that out there so it's out of harm's way. Don't move the board, which was my temptation. So here I have a brand new number 3 pointed brush, and over in my kit I've got about 30 of them, and they last for a while and then they stop working, and it's just sometimes the nature of it. You'll notice as I've been painting, I think from memory I haven't really cleaned the palette out at any stage. I've just been absorbing the colours and changing them as they roll along. That kind of gives a nice little combination going into it, and I'll just have to move around a little bit as we do this. Water it off a little bit. So I'm checking my hand to see whether I've got any residue on there, because I've been in here. I don't want any of that to come into the painting. I'll just set my ruler at an angle, and it's just gently on the page, and I'm just running this up as a little bit of a vertical. And now that shape doesn't have to be, you know, particularly hard. It's a marine scene. There's ropes and attachments. I can nibble the edge, load it, come around. Again, I'll keep on checking there because this is where I'm likely to imprint and stamp. Load onto the side in there a little bit. Shift to the lighter of the mast, and out of this what I'm doing is I'm not trying to paint a brown mast specifically. I just want it to be a grungy grey of some sort. A little bit moist in there, not a problem. Where it's moist, thicken the paint and it won't spread too much. It's quite wet in there unfortunately at the moment, but I talk about not using a hairdryer. I think it's pretty antisocial. So go to another part of the painting where it's dry and let it catch up as it goes in there. So as I change this around, I can add colour into it a little bit. Come back and check how high your mast is getting, whether it's too large or not. I think it's okay for the moment. Come back down in here, nibble away. Again, architecture of the ship is just to know what is happening with the cross trees, and we do have a yard or a spar holding the gaff coming down, and I wanted to make it as, not vertical, but as close to vertical, more so than I did on the other one. That's where doing a sketch is really nice, is you start to learn things through it. So I'm just reviewing for a second whether I like that yard or not. It feels like it has a chance of being just that little bit too strong. So again, I've got a wet tissue or damp tissue. Dab it on the towel if I need to. And all I've done, I've gone in and out, and I'm just taking out some of the weight in that yard. So I've still kept some of the dark, I've just got a bit of a transition of light and dark going into it. Back in over here, I have a attachment point up there, there's some blocks, and there's some stays or some shrouds for whoever's brave enough to run up to that part of the mast to come into it. You can see the brush ruling, how beautiful it is to work with. It takes time. It revolves around having, that was a bit of a clunkier one. Sorry, just holding my breath as I painted that one. It revolves around having the metal and your finger as an attachment point to it. It won't work like that, it won't work like that. Those two must be in play, and you're creating like a slide. And I grow my nail so that you can run it up and down, and I tend to soften up the pencil, or the ruler rather, with a bit of sandpaper so I don't actually get splinters up my nail, which is quite painful, and build it around. Not every rope has to be done with a ruler. Now and then it's nice to change that around. So what I'm doing is I'm rehearsing, and I'll just come back. And again, this is where you hold your breath, do it confidently, and hope that you don't overshoot things in there. Not too bad. A little bit of a nibble. Bit of a nibble again. A little bit of light on the top in there as it builds around. Build around in here. Again, the sky is quite dry, so now I can sort of paint into it quite happily. And I'm sorry if the back of my head sort of appeared in the painting. I'll move back out again. Do I know my ropes? Sort of. Do I know them properly? Not really, don't profess to. Do I know them well enough to fake it? Yes, I think so. Okay, here's a moment of point. So you see these ruler marks here, they're from the other side. And so they've forced have they? Maybe they haven't. They may have forced me to do something different with the mast. I'm going to bring it forward here a little bit more. And it's sort of, again, the pencil drawing is down in there. I don't mind that little anomaly turning up, that's fine. The way is not to do that is to do it when it's a bit drier. But I do want to make sure I don't get any more of them, because I don't want that many masts. You can come up out of that area here. In this painting I'll do enough for the rigging that we can understand what I'm trying to do, but not so much that I have to bore you. Again, I'm going back in with quite dry paint. Dry paint means that in the palette you see how it's pulling back on itself, that I mix it and it opens up. That means the moisture's leaving it, and it's got a kind of an elasticity into it, which makes it that little bit darker. And where you've got a moist area, just get a little bit more warmth into it. Again, checking the back of my hand. Just coming down in there, and it'll stick. So I can make it, even though it's got a bit of a soft edge, it'll stick in there and do a little bit of a something into it. Come back into there, back down in here, and I'm just testing now. I'm just seeing whether this is going to be receptive or not to some darks. Not too bad. So it's now starting to get a little bit of a drift down into the hole. Dry brush painting in there, so that's kind of nice where it's going. That was wonderful a minute ago, and I made it less wonderful, and I'll probably now have to let it dry a bit. So this one now is a dry tissue, just to take out some of the sting in there, and I'll come back and try and work that again later. It's kind of nice to know things don't always behave. Take out some of those little marks in there with my finger. I think you'll be starting to see how the boat is slowly emerging out of the mists. Something poetic about that very statement, I reckon. Not sure how it's connecting up in there, but I've got ropes that will disguise it, and I've got some a cat head, as it's called. And I'm just pretending I know there's stuff on the deck in there that I'm just making behave. Coming through. You notice how I'm using the ruler. It's not that I don't have a steady hand, it just helps me to get alignment. So I'm aligning that little mark there is part of the foredeck, and I want it to align with what's happening at the stern. And it's so that I don't have these sort of movements doing that. It's better if they all line up subtly. They can be painterly, but if they line up, they start to help to create the perspective and shaping of the boat. And again, these are just little bits of incidental information, pretending. They could actually start to become crew members at some point. There's one. That'll help to give a bit of scale. A friend of mine was talking last night about the number of boats where they're run by phantoms. No one's on board at all. It's lovely to put the figures in there. They don't have to take over. They can just be kind of in play, moving around. Again, warm colds. I've got blues, bit of burnt sienna. So they're starting to try and imply information where there isn't any real understanding of what's going on at the moment. That dark is pretending to be the far side of the boat, leading us into the stern. And it's all lovely and wet. And that helps to do here. If you remember when I was drawing, how I didn't want to commit to that outer edge until I had paint, and now it's sort of coming into play for me. I'm going to come back in here. As lovely as all that is, it won't last. It is going to have to be addressed in some form, because I want that deck to come out and show. And here I'm still looking and searching to try and get that bit of mast having a bit of strength. This bit of the bowsprit coming out. Again, nice to know exactly what happens on a boat, and I don't profess that I know everything. I know enough to get away with it, I think, is how I would say it. But I'm a president of the Marine Painters Society of Australia, or Australian Society of Marine Artists as we call ourselves, and I'm getting away with it. But amongst our members are some who just really do model, make and understand everything, and we have some fun conversations. And part of the reason I wanted to do this video was with that in mind, that there's the opportunity, I think, for these sort of videos to be seen in that context, but anyone else as well, just to enjoy the idea of what it is to do a marine painting, which perhaps leads to a really good question. You'll hear two words. You'll hear marine and you'll hear maritime. I'm sort of filling the space a little bit while I do some interesting things in the head of the boat there. Just putting a few little stray ropes and stuff like that as they're going along, as they're going into it. So there is a difference, and it's a debatable difference, because you'll find different people use it in different ways as to what it is, and you won't get full agreement from an audience. But my interpretation is that marine is by the sea, and marine is in the sea, and maritime is by the sea. So I'm just slipping some ropes in there that are helping to hold the sail in place. So what that means is that a boat is in the sea becomes a marine subject, but a boat up on a hard or on a dock or something like that becomes a maritime, because it's almost by the sea, and the story is more about the land and where it is rather than being in the water and sailing. So our society is called marine artists, but we accept all manner of maritime work as well. Hopefully that's an entertaining thought as we drift away in here. So I'm just solidifying the light of the sail as it's coming through. And again, we're working with moisture in there, and that's a dreadful colour. It's just dying. So I'm just going to get a little bit of atmospheric into it, and I think about what it needs. I think it needs to be colder, so I might need to try and introduce just a little bit of, that might be too much, but it'll grunge down quite happily, and it'll have some roping to help, I'm sure. But this drawing is to give us two sides of the sail. I think it'll go back to mauve in the end, or grey. You notice when I paint, I'll paint a little moment and then just pause for a second to see whether it's behaving or doing exactly what we want it to do. Run those together. It doesn't matter if one sail becomes part of the next sail. That's actually really quite nice into it. And there was a little moment there that is starting to behave as I want. It's got that drift of light that goes on a big sail, because it changes. There's reflections from underneath that may come into play, and then that might cue what I want to do with this one here to bring it back to life. Nothing like saying things confidently, expecting them to work, and then finding that they're perhaps not working. But again, your tissue comes into play, and I've got any amount of roping that can be in here as well, where I put that lovely fine brush that I'm working with. Drift that one into it. That's a scalpel. It's not a disaster. I'm just scratching back in there a touch. It's probably stuff to do in a little while. I'll try just a few marks into it, because what happens is the scalpel will scratch back to the light, but it will also mean that when you visit it again, it will fill up and become just a dark, which may or may not be what you want. Let's get a couple more ropes down here. See how that's starting to become fairly dirty in there. Out on my right I have some toweling just in case for this sort of stuff. Let's go back up in here. Someone will prove me wrong, but I don't think you can put too many ropes on a boat. I think the more of the merrier. They just add that lovely bit of life into it. Let's hope this is dry now. Let's come back into the side here. Yep. So before then that was really messy and muddy, and I did quite a reasonable sort of channel for the rigging to come down to, and then I mucked around with it and it stopped behaving, and I dried it with a tissue and then left it for a while, and now it's saying, yeah, welcome back, come on in and have a bit of a play in here and see if you can make it work a touch more. and it's starting to just give me the chance to chisel up a few things. There's still wet in wet activity going on in there, but it's starting to behave for me. See how we've got this drift? We've gone from the foredeck through in here and then back into the sea. I really like that. I don't know whether it will last. I wouldn't mind it. Almost like it feels like the sea might have been over and washing off, and that would make sense as it came through. See this little lift of my nail or my finger? I'm going to try and see if I can't maintain that for a little bit longer. Again, these are things in the painting that are nice if they can last the journey. They don't always last the journey though. They can get overtaken. Just get that little sweep of sail in there. Again, the wrong colour. Moderately wrong colour anyway. Every time I paint, I'm still reviewing and coming back and reviewing and coming back to make sure that it's starting to behave exactly what I want it to do. What I am pleased is that what I thought was really nice was, but it won't last, and I don't want it to last because I know now that this hull is starting to, it behaved nicely, but it's starting to dry out and it's starting to look a little bit weak for what else I'm building in here. So it's asking me to go back in there now. It's an ironic thing. I think sometimes a watercolour particularly, but I think all paintings talk to the painter and say, look, this is what you need to do. And you can make your own mind up whether you do everything your painting says, but it is one of those things that is quite nice sometimes, is to listen to the language or the chatter that it's providing, inviting you to go back in and address areas. And I think that may be part of the charm of being a painter, is that you feel like there's a conversation going on with your painting. Painters in demonstrations can talk some absolute nonsense as well. Back in and down. Something has to be holding this big yard. Back down and in. If it didn't get seen, these two ropes here, they're just a nice, they're the longest ruled lines that I've painted in this painting. They're quite nice, and they're doing a nice little strength onto it. So back into the edge of the sail. It's still a bit wet. Try and get a few marks into it. A little bit of enigmatic stuff going on in this bit. Happy for that, just to create noise and nonsense going in there. Okay, let's see if we can get the larger moments coming in. The attachment point is around about here. These are where they attach, and that's the channels here, so I've got to get them from there to there while I go in behind the sail, because that's where the one would be. So that's where I'm pressing my rig in here. I know I have to stop around about there and bring it up, and another one. And each time I'm doing these, I'm absolutely holding my breath, because these are really good to get right. And leaving them till a little bit later means that you're not going to necessarily paint over it later on. These are what hold ships up, or hold the masts up, and what's on one side must be on the other, and it's probably a wider thing, so it goes to around about that point, connects up again. It's on the outside of the hull, so the rigging doesn't get caught with it. Backing up. That one's never going to hold anything, so just go a little bit thicker, so just weigh this a little bit harder. These are what, if you know shippy stories, the ratlins, if you'd like. They're for, sailors to climb up and down the mast. And then when they need to go to the next mast, they need what they call futtocks, not buttocks. And that's where they go on the outside. and or if they're new and they're green, they go up through called a lubber's hole up through here and then come back out. But that was kind of the separation of who was a good sailor and who wasn't, whether they went on the outside where it was riskier or whether they went on the inside. Picking those up as they're coming along. Having said we're talking about sailors, let's get one brave soul going up. So there's his white shirt. There's his head and tarry pigtail growing out. His blue pants. He must be moving very fast, so I'll just leave him have a little bit of mystery. So he may or may not hold. Might need to have a little bit more attention later on with the fine brush, but it's starting to give me scale of things going on in there. Now to come forward. This is a nice little device to do when you're working on the rigging of a boat, is you work from the fore back or coming near to you so that you can get the ropes that are overlapping. And we're going to go to that little cross tree there, and you're going down to there. So you kind of know where it is and know what you have to avoid. So here it goes up, cross there, finds the other side of the sail, and then goes up. Journey in the same direction. These little crossovers that you put into it are quite nice little actions. What goes up must come back down. We work out where it might be and then just enjoy that journey going through. So out of this, what I'm suggesting is that you might enjoy developing your skills at brush ruling just for that little shaping, and it applies to a lot of different painting. If landscape you're doing sheds and things like that, that's where it can really come into play nicely. But it's a skill that takes time. Wilby Rackerman, RMIT, 1980s, possibly no longer with us, I don't know, but he made us do any number of these sort of brush ruling exercises, and it really does take, it took us 6 months to be able to really understand how to make it work, and it will take you that sort of time as well. But it's really worth persisting with it and understanding it, and someday I'd like to do sort of more of a demonstration about it. A couple of ropes in here. Waiting for that to really dry in there. So there. You'll notice how as it's painting, it's dry on these, wet on here, which means I can actually just smear it with my finger without actually affecting the sky too much as it builds in there. Lining things up in here. Still not resolved with that colour. I knew this morning when I woke up, when I painted it, I didn't want to make it too dark. I don't want to make it like the sail has one colour on one side and another on another. So I don't want it to continue on, but I'll see how that goes. I'm just letting it drift. Sometimes if you solve one part of the painting, you solve the other. So I don't mind what that's doing there. Not sure it's accurate, but I don't mind what it's doing here. And maybe down in here I can work out some things later on. That's now starting to become what I call just a little bit too apparent. So I'm just, it's almost like back to that drinkable wash again I talked about. Just annoying it a little bit, getting some variations going into it. Something natural happened, so that little spark of light came into it. I think I'll just try and fake that a little bit more as it goes along in that journey. Back up into the corner here. Perhaps that's a little bit of the cast light going into it. Back in and around. Okay, back into now the hull of the painting. Explorational as much as anything at the moment. Quite a dry sort of a brush or a paint. Coming underneath the channel there. Coming up in here into the quarterdeck. Make it kind of strong. come from the top. Get that little catch of light in here. Same in there. How much hull do we want to see? This is what I call growing shapes. So they're only small shapes in physical form, but they represent big parts of the boat or the ship as they come through. So I'm just dry brushing that around. And in the reference you'll see how there's quite an amount of hull coming down. I'll put a little bit more. And what it's doing, it's creating that little bit of wave splash that's coming through into it. Feeding in there. Dry the brush, or even just touch it with my hand, just to get a little bit of something. So it's trying to be something, and I can recognise it, not necessarily successfully, so I'll keep pushing through with it. This is using that bright synthetic brush, and I think I've sort of said that in the intro about how you can use it to just help to push the paint out, create lights or softer edging going through into it. Lifting out, drying it as we go. So I have Emilio standing right next to me doing the filming and keeping an eye on the microphones and everything like that, and I don't think I've felt like he's been in the room at all, which I'm sure is probably a compliment to him. But it is an interesting thing when you do this moment, how you can just drift into enjoying your painting in an audience. And often you'll find this is happening with in a demonstration, that you are chattering away and you feel like you're talking to people, and it's nice when they respond back and you've got a little bit of information, but you really are going into your own little world as a painter. So here is a little thing I like to try and do, and that is, when I'm putting an edge, I try not to rule the absolute sharp edge, and we may or may not be able to see it, but that's the end of the transom or the stern, and rather than make it one fixed hard line, I'll just build it up with a series of blobbles, that's a good tech term, and dobbles, just to feel like it's got a broken edge or a strobing edge coming into it. So I'll do the same down in here a little bit. And you'll find that in the work of J.J. Hilder, or Jesse Dewhurst Hilder is where I really picked it up, but it's, you know, it's not, doesn't belong to him, but it's just a way of softening up information on the edge of it so that it doesn't become an absolute hard edge, because hard edges here are hurting the softness and the joy around us as we go. So if I come down on that side there, so I'm almost nibbling the edge as it breaks around a little bit. Now I think adding that dark in there actually really helped. As much as I really enjoyed what was happening, I think it is now starting to resonate more as a whole of the ship, and I think it's carrying some of the darks in other parts of the rigging as well, and it's introduced its own little bit of interest in the wave breaking into the end of the stern. So it's almost like these waves are rolling in and pushing and driving the ship anywhere it wants to not go. As long as these brave sailors can get across and away from the shore, they will be happy and they can make harbour. Earlier on, I talked a bit about a cube having a deck and a side and a stern, and here I'm trying to, there's a very subtle difference in here. It's not a hard edge, but it's just a variation on it. So these are kind of in shade, and then the light on the deck. Those little elements in a painting are very important to help understand what the structure is. And once found, so easy to get involved and start to think you're helping them by putting in more detail. So I'm sort of limiting just how much I visit into that area. That light is so important in the painting, and often that is the case. So often, I think I've said it earlier, the bits that you're painting aren't necessarily of any use to the painting other than revealing the light, which is what your audience is really thirsting for or looking for. And so often there's a sort of almost a safety in that, so when you recognise it, allowing that to become part of the painting in there. Just nearly finishing on this one now. I just want to visit the sea a touch. So I'm going back to these sort of dirty mixes, and I just want to, I've got a lot of light in here. I don't want to get too much of a play in here. Dry the brush around a little bit. So these are behaving differently to the mark making of the wet in wet. These are becoming dry focused marks. Again, spontaneous rather than too deliberate. Move the brush around into unexpected areas. And there's a certain amount of self-belief needed in all these mark making, particularly in a watercolour, more so in watercolour than anything. In an oil paint you have the opportunity to revisit and change things. In a watercolour you can adapt and you can wash back out. You're not loaded with it, but it lends itself to being spontaneous, because often those little moments, small as they are, may really just sparkle and hold the audience or entrance them with its magic. And it's not that you've been clever, it's probably you've just been clever enough to leave some things alone. There was nice bits in here I don't want to lose specifically, but so as my voice wears down, I know that I'm approaching conclusion, just because it will finish, so I think I'm close to it. Again, remember I talked a bit about that drift through here, and if you look at this drift, we can sort of drift in from this sail, perhaps that edge, drift in through here, down into our deck, down into the waves, in and amongst it, back and around. There's a bit of mystery near the stern. We're back out here. This walk into the light, as I like to think about it, is connecting the painting up. And it's the part of a painting that's really important for a watercolourist, particularly, is to not feel like you've made all the elements. This wet in wet quality of watercolour is so beautiful to link and marry the whole page. And that's where I think you get your atmosphere from. It doesn't mean you don't have some strong marks, but you don't necessarily have to fill it with too many either. That delineation is quite important. And this is a part of a painting where you might find that you review a little bit, so you might sort of put it away and then just visit it every day or so and just put a dab in there or a mark in there. You don't have to put too many in at one time. And it can be a process over weeks or months even if you choose to. And I'm toying with whether I want to put something in here, and my instincts are saying just leave it alone, it's probably working all nicely, but I think I'm just going to give you a couple of marks so that you can see that they can help to translate some of the wet in wet if you'd like. Just darken off in here, light and shade sort of feeling is the emotion, bit of dry brush. Back in there, happy with that little join or non-join. Damp tissue coming into play. Like we did up here on the yard, maybe just lift a little bit out here and there if it needs it. That's been a problem spot for a while. I'll just lift into that. That's the nail I broke and bit yesterday. No idea what I'm doing there. It's just noise at the moment or something. Maybe it could be a last residue of another rock. Again, increase that little threat. little bit of the blue, damp tissue, in and out, not across, so that you create something going on in there. Washed it off. So what I'm doing is I'm wetting the brush, it's in the paint, dried on the towel, it's got enough moisture into it that I can use it, and I'm just pushing back up onto the rock, and it's creating ever so slightly that softening of light. It can build quite an amount of light into it. In fact, with a damp tissue, I can almost lift it right back to the white of the paper. And it means that anything that you reveal as looking a touch awkward, it is amazing how you can have a thought here and go over here to your pot or your paint and come back and have no idea what your thought was initially. You can lose yourself in your painting and you can lose spots onto it. And what it's saying to you is that it's not like it's a small little area of the painting. When you're viewing into it, it feels like an expanse building in there, and that's kind of a nice sort of a play into it. Again, I'll grab my mirror and have a bit of a look and see if I've forgotten anything. There's one final one I want to try and put in. I review it with what I painted as a sketch, and I think there's qualities in the first sketch that didn't translate into the demo or the piece that I've done in now, but I won't worry about it. And then initially when I started painting, I was very excited about the green up in the top there, and it has disappeared with the lighting and perhaps the pressure of painting, but it's not something you can fight back and get it. That would be the journey of another painting at some stage. So it's sort of kind of concentrate on what I'm doing here. Again, in my classes I do tend to talk a lot about when you're painting to always remember that this is a painting for a particular time, and that there's no reason why you can't repeat the process. When you think about the time investment that you're really putting into it, it's really a couple of hours of your day, perhaps a bit more, and you can then actually revisit that again at some point and redo the whole exercise again and put the green of the sky in if you choose to. Still just fiddling. This is a beautiful time of the painting to be in there, just to push and glaze and soften and tease up ideas into it. A little bit of a light going on in here. I think what's lovely is that you will have, the audience, seen moments in the painting, and perhaps I've addressed your thoughts into it. No painting is perfect. Imperfections are part of the process. But it doesn't mean that the audience isn't actually a really valuable player in the equation. There's a lovely sort of sense of what happens in a painting is the artist has ownership of the page at the very beginning, and he paints away and enjoys what they're working on, and he tries to work as professionally or as efficiently as he can, and at some point a viewer comes into it and can actually then start to evaluate their prowess or ability to do that for them, and see whether they enjoy the painting equally and whether they see bits into it that the painter never even saw. And I often see that when you have a painting that's actually on somebody else's wall, and they point out things that they really love about it, and you think, I never saw it, because you just don't see it all the time. So I know that probably this is nearly enough to stop for the demo, and I know that because the mark making I'm doing now is quite non-incidental. It's not really changing anything, it's just tweaking and refining and building. So I think that is probably for the exercise as far as we need to go for it. The invitation would be to revisit further into the sea, and then that invitation would in turn add some more things into it. Here's a lovely moment. This turned up. We can love it. It could become a huge albatross, or we could see whether we can tease it out. Again, the damp tissue. And things you might try are, here's the spray bottle. Protect what you've painted. Paint, drop it in. Damp tissue again. And see if you can lift it out. And there it is, it disappeared. So it's found soon enough. So that's why I think sometimes it's important not to panic about a painting if a moment happens. And up here I did some flicks and sprays, so I've got imperfections in there. Happy for that sort of technique and things like that to be in the painting. But if you do get those moments where, you know, that's why it happened, just sort of got all grungy on the hand and I got a bit lazy, there is some moments in it here and here. I'll put that down to demonstration, but I don't mind those sort of activities appearing in the page from time to time. Last little mark into it. I am often asked about my signature, and I'll find the brush that I need for it, which will be somewhere. Just left the scene for a minute. I am here. So I tend to like to do a bead of gouache, find my ruler. So this is the white gouache of the painter, and I can make my decision left, right. For some reason we don't sign in the middle of the painting. I'm not sure why not, but I'll bow to some common sense. Mix it up a little bit. And there we go. And Emilio, because you've been patiently filming and recording and watching, I would love you to have this as my gift to you for your work. So I'll call it quits there if that seems to be about the right moment for everyone. Hope you've enjoyed it. Hope you've understand that the fascinations of watercolour and marine go hand in hand, and that it's done the things that you wanted to see. Thank you very much.